Presiding Officer, there has been clear and positive progress in the delivery of Scotland's newest public service. From having no Scottish social security system, we now have in excess of 400 staff working for Social Security Scotland, a Social Security Commission to review our regulations, published a benefits take-up strategy, and we've co-produced a groundbreaking social security charter. 7 new benefits have now been successfully introduced by this government: Carers Allowance Supplement, the 3 elements of the Best Start Grant, Best Start Foods, Funeral Support Payment, and most recently the Young Carer Grant. We are on track to complete the first phase of benefits, with Job Start payment due to begin in spring if we get the cooperation of the UK Government. This financial year, we expect to put £350 million into the hands of those in Scotland who need it most. I am proud of this achievement, and I'm very proud that we have changed the narrative surrounding the provision of social security in this country. When people use words like humiliating, degrading and inhumane to explain the current UK Government system, this tells me that there is something fundamentally wrong. Time and time again, I have heard from individuals who live in fear of the dreaded DWP brown envelope dropping through the letterbox. That is why we have taken a different approach and embedded the values of dignity, fairness and respect into the design of our social security system. This is not just rhetoric, it is already bringing about real change and a move away from the stigma of benefits to recognising that they are an investment in our people. This is our vision for social security, and it is indeed embedded in the principles of the Social Security Act. And it is embedded in our response to the consultation on disability assistance that we published yesterday. I believe that the significant response we received to the consultation, both from individuals and from a wide range of organisations, reflects the level of interest in our ambition to build a new and a different social security system. Our response sets out how we will use the responses to further develop our proposals for disability assistance to ensure that we are designing a system with disabled people that meet their needs. My priority is to ensure that we deliver changes in a way that is safe, sustainable, and most importantly protects the interests of disabled people without risking existing entitlements to passported benefits, for example the severe disability premiums in ESA. And I do not underestimate the scale of the challenge and the complexity of the task that we have before us. We need to disentangle a complex system of social security and simultaneously build a new system from scratch. The current social security system touches the lives of 1 in 10 people living in Scotland, and for disability benefits around 500,000 people. So it is critical that we get our processes right. But much will depend upon the cooperation of the Department for Work and Pensions. I want a seamless transition for people receiving benefits, and the UK Government must do their bit too to ensure that this happens. There is no getting away from the fact that this is a joint programme of work between 2 governments, and as I have said before and will reiterate again, for the first time 2 governments must have 2 systems that work seamlessly together, and our shared priority must be to ensure that people get the right money at the right time. Our approach to designing disability assistance is simple. We will co-design it with people and organisations who have lived experience of the current system. And I want to be clear that the proposals set out in our response to the consultation are the start of our ambitions, not the end. These, along with the commitments we have already brought out, will revolutionise how people are treated when it comes to disability payments. The next phase of delivery for social security payments is the delivery of the most complex payments within our programme to date. This is clearly a challenge, but it is also an opportunity. An opportunity to build trust in a decision-making process that takes account of the details of someone's condition or disability and how it impacts on their life. It's an opportunity to ensure that those applying for disability payments are treated with dignity and respect at every step of the process and feel supported, not stigmatised. Our next steps will be guidance for Social Security Scotland staff and the formulation of regulations, starting with the Disability Assistance for Children and Young People, which will be published before Christmas. And I'd now like to turn to some of the detail in our response to the consultation. A person-centred approach is one of the cornerstones of our new social security system, and this was thoroughly endorsed by respondents. I believe a crucial part of this commitment is making sure that we are being transparent about our decision-making criteria. We must provide clear and accessible guidance to clients so that they understand what information the agency needs to make a decision about their entitlement. This might sound obvious, but our stakeholder research has shown that the current system is largely impenetrable. Therefore, this is a groundbreaking commitment that we are making. Another significant departure from the present system will mean case managers, those who are making the decisions on entitlement, only seek one source of formal information in many cases, which broadly supports the daily living and mobility needs described by the individual. It could be from a whole range of professionals involved in the life of the individual, a physiotherapist, a teacher, a support worker, whoever can provide insights into the impact of the individual's disability it has on their life. Many respondents also told us of the insight that can be provided by an individual's informal support network. Where this is provided, it will be considered on its own merits, and consultation respondents showed significant support for this approach, one that no longer has a hierarchy of supporting information. And we are all well aware of just how awful many disabled people's experiences of claiming the current personal independence payment have been. Our dramatically different approach means we will only carry out face-to-face assessments for Scotland's replacement benefit where there is no other way of getting information, which means we will significantly reduce the numbers that are needed. Our commitments include face-to-face assessments that will be delivered by Social Security Scotland, fully supported by public sector healthcare professionals. Assessors will be suitably qualified. Clients will have more choice and control over the time and location of their assessment. And to improve transparency, assessments will be audio recorded as standard. And we'll go further. Certainly.
Mark Griffin.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that taking that intervention. The Cabinet Secretary will remember that I raised the point about audio recordings of an assessment and raised the issue of BSL users' assessments, and the Cabinet Secretary made a commitment to come back to me on that. I wonder if there's any progress being made on those recordings being made visually as well as audio recordings to support BSL users.
Shelley-Ann Somerville.
Well, that's something which I am very keen that we work on in general as part of our inclusive communications commitment around social security. And as we move forward with the design of the assessments process and what that will absolutely entail, when that detailed work is going on, I absolutely will ensure that the members kept fully up to speed on that to ensure that he's satisfied that we've taken that very seriously, because I certainly do myself. So I'll give that commitment again to him today. One other area where we will also go further is around informal observations. These are currently made about individuals by assessors in the DWP system, and it's an element of the assessments process that I feel is particularly at odds with our ethos of dignity, fairness and respect. Given the responses in the consultation and advice from the Disability and Carers Benefits Expert Advisory Group, all clients will be told during the assessment process if an observation about them has been made. The client or the person with them will therefore also be given an opportunity to respond to the assessor's observations. Gone will be the days of disabled people fearing that the assessors are trying to catch them out, or that they're being watched to ensure that there are any signs that they are not as disabled as that they say that they are. Sir.
Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you. I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary. Will the Cabinet Secretary comment on if an individual wants a home visit rather than having to go to an assessment centre, will that now be given automatically if an individual asks for that?
Shelley-Ann Somerville.
Well, we've absolutely made the commitment that should a person require a home assessment, then that will be looked at very seriously to ensure that we can do that if that's required. But if it's not a home assessment that's required, but something closer to home, then that can also be looked at. So I suppose that I would consider this as a staged process. Do people want something in their home? Do they want something closer to home than is already, that is already the case under the current system? And I would say that there's a myriad of different ways, depending on what the person wants, that we might actually be able to satisfy that. But absolutely, if there's a requirement for a home assessment, then that will certainly be considered very favourably indeed. Can I move on then to the PIP descriptors? And the majority of respondents agreed with our proposal to use a point-based system to determine eligibility. Some people did suggest moving away from such a system entirely, but this simply cannot be done if we are to replace these benefits on time early in 2021. Some people have also raised concerns about certain descriptors. However, I am acutely aware of the risks of making changes to the current descriptors, which could create a two-tier system during transition and could also jeopardise entitlement to passported benefits. Put simply, if we decided to change eligibility thresholds, the DDP is within its rights to refuse passported benefits to any or all new claims assessed under those rules. That's why it's important to work with the stakeholders to determine what they want to see and to be frank with them if that threatens other payments which people depend on. That does not mean that things will stay as they are. They certainly will not. In balancing these complex and sensitive issues, work is underway to explore what can be changed, with a particular focus on the guidance for case managers to fully capture the impact of living with mental health conditions, other fluctuating conditions and learning disabilities. And that's why Social Security Scotland case managers have the training and guidance they need to properly consider the needs of all individuals, no matter what type of disability or condition they have. And the agency will work with stakeholders to develop that training to ensure that it reflects the lived experience of the individuals and case studies demonstrating how the descriptors should be applied to each and every condition or disability. A proportion of specialist advisors who are health and social care professionals will have specific expertise in mental illness and learning disabilities and will be able to provide advice and support to case managers. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, this is an approach that we have taken from the start, is listening to people, listening to those with the lived experience, whether it's about changing our views on redeterminations through the consultation process or looking very seriously at other changes that we can make. We will continue to listen. Our system will not only look and feel different, it is and it will be different. But we will continue to listen, to learn, to make changes, ensuring our social security system reflects our ambitions for a human rights-based approach to help people secure the financial support that they are entitled to. And I move the motion in my name.
I now call on Jeremy Balfour to speak to and move Amendment 19577.1. 7 minutes, please, Mr Balfour.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I just remind members that I am in receipt of PIP? Can I welcome the debate this afternoon? But I welcome it with a slight caveat that we have been here before. We have debated this issue on a number of occasions. And although I acknowledge there have been some progress made by the government, I think it would be to say progress is slow and slower than most of the third sector and those who are in receipt of benefits would want. I think what comes out of the consultation responses and also the briefing papers we have received from many of the third sector is they welcome the warm words, but they actually now want to see some action and some movement by the Scottish Government. And certainly that's what we would like to see on this side of the chamber. Now, I do acknowledge that some progress has been made. We have some of the benefits up and running. We have a new Social Security agency working. But the most difficult of the benefits now are still to come. And I think this will be the real challenge for the Scottish Government. And that is why in our amendment we are asking that there is no more delay and no more pushing back in regard to those benefits that haven't been taken over fully and the regulations yet laid before Parliament by the Scottish Government. Because there has been delay here, and particularly around PIP, there has been major delay. And I have to say I am slightly confused, Deputy Presiding Officer, about what is the Scottish Government's position in regard to the new Scottish PIP. We hear in one sentence it's going to be different, that it's not going to be like DWP, but in the next sentence we hear, well, actually the descriptors are going to be exactly the same as they are before. And that, I have to confess, confuses me slightly.
Shirley-Ann Somerville.
I'm very grateful for the member to allow me to intervene, to point to the letter I wrote to the Social Security Committee, which talked about the model client journey that we're going to go through, all the differences that will be, the comparators that I put in that from the Scottish to the UK systems, the number of pages that actually goes to demonstrates how there will be real change, and people are already experiencing that in the benefits we're already providing.
Jeremy Balfour.
Well, with respect to the Cabinet Secretary, what she's talking about here is process. What she's talking about is how many pages do I have to fill out for a form? Will I receive an assessment? What we're not hearing from the Scottish Government is it going to be any different in regard to the descriptors, in regard to what people will get from the DWP system at the moment? Because the Scottish Government has spent the last 3 years criticising the DWP and all that is around PIP. But now they're saying, well, actually, we're not going to change the descriptors. They're going to stay exactly the same. So I appreciate the process is going to be different, but actually the number of people that get PIP, what are they going to be assessed on, seems to me to be no different from that at the moment. What I do welcome, again, from the Scottish Government is it's talking about those in regard to have variation of conditions. And I would again ask the Cabinet Secretary in particular to look at the issue of epilepsy. I do think those who suffer from that condition do struggle to meet the criteria and meet the descriptors around PIP. And I would welcome, maybe in her closing remarks, just to say whether, in particular, they would look at the issue of epilepsy, which I do think needs to be looked at differently. If I can turn briefly, Deputy Presiding Officer, to the Labour amendment. I do have sympathy with it, but we will not be supporting it tonight. The reason for not supporting it tonight is it is saying let's get rid of the 20 metres, and at the same time is saying, but let's consult with what the third sector, with doctors and others, think. And I think that consultation has to take place before we say we need to get rid of the 20 metres completely. And I think also it misses that, yes, distance is one of the things that you look at to whether someone should get the higher rate of PIP. But there's also time and distance and manner of walking. And I think we have to look at it holistically in the whole, rather than just picking up the kind of headline 20 metres. So I do think the Scottish Government needs to come forward with its thinking. Again, I would be interested when the Cabinet Secretary is concluding her remarks, is that one of the descriptors that she thinks will change in any way at all, or is that one that she's just going to simply lift from DWP and keep the same? Because I think the whole issue around that, around the number of people that are or not getting cars, is one that we have to look at very carefully. The other part of the amendment which I would just like to touch on is that of the transition period. Again, I'm pleased that the Cabinet Secretary mentioned that in her opening statement, but I think there is still out there some concern in regard to how this will work in practice. And I absolutely echo her remarks that this has to be a system that both the Westminster and the Scottish Governments do work together. I think there has been progress in regard to that. I think both parties are trying their best, and I hope that will continue, because what we do need to make absolutely clear, and I think there is cross-party support for this, is that those who are already on a benefit, when they are transitioned, the money arrives in their bank account at the right time with the right amount in there. And that will require both the work from DWP and Scottish Government. I do think we are now at the stage where we need to see not just one word, as I said. I think we do need to see some actually firm working from Scottish Government. I do appreciate they keep talking about consulting and listening and taking people with them, and that is absolutely right. But we, as opposition and as a parliament, I think I would urge the government to produce at least some kind of where they are in regard to the workings, so that we can have a better debate. Deputy Presiding Officer, I move the amendment in my name.
I now call on Mark Griffin to speak to and move amendment 19577.2 for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful that the Cabinet Secretary has brought this debate to the Chamber today so that we can continue discussing the detail of what Scottish Social Security will look like for disabled people. In the 8 months since we debated uprating for carers and received consultation proposals, hundreds of people have pored over the possibilities of the new system and asked eagerly for more detail. For people with lived experience of PIP, DLA or attendance allowance, this will have been a welcome process. although I think quite a lot of the people may feel like they've answered some of these questions a couple of times before. On the reduced redetermination timescales, clear feedback has produced clear results. On the naming proposals and indefinite awards, I think some details definitely still need to be tied up. In that sense, the consultation, that co-design approach the government referred to in their motion, which we will support, has achieved welcome results. And in anticipation of the debate, helpful briefings from Child Poverty Action Group, Citizens Advice, MS Society, Marie Curie, Inclusion Scotland and others have proven essential. An issue in all of them, every single one of them, as well as submissions made to the consultation, is their call for the 20-metre rule to end. That's the basis for the Labour amendment today. Our amendment doesn't specify reinstatement of the 50-metre rule, but in keeping with the approach celebrated in the government's motion, that replacement must now be delivered through deliberation and discussion. Described as ludicrous by someone with MS, and a rule that would put someone in pain all the time I'm on my feet, and the whole experience would make me completely knackered by another. It's a rule that Inclusion point out 172 out of the 173 organisations replying to the UK Government PIP consultation advised against. And Citizens Advice Scotland's volunteers have had to witness case upon case of people losing their higher rate mobility and then, as a result, losing their mobility car. And it's the very issue which gave rise to serious concerns in the government's own consultation. And I'm wholeheartedly aware of the government's concern that it might create a two-tier system. It might risk passport and come with a cost, or risk safe and secure transitions. Those are concerns are abundantly clear when it comes to extending mobility for older people. But the safe and secure transition cannot itself be the force that stops change materialising. Underlined by a wealth of clear feedback and lived experience, this is a change that would give dignity and respect to disabled people. The Cabinet Secretary, yesterday, your own press release said that you wanted a sea change with a new system designed from the ground up, together with users themselves, that puts people first. The back in this change would do just that. Using these powers for the benefit of Scotland's disabled people must not be in tension with the ambition for a safe and secure transition, and I ask the Government to accept our amendment. As the Alliance pointed out in its submission, the extension of children and young people's entitlement to 18 represents a specific, clear example where departing from the current system does not risk transition or create any tension. 5 years after Smith, with hundreds of thousands of people still at the mercy of the DWP, that transition has barely started, and so now is the time to make that decision. Before I conclude, I want to hark back to last year when the Chamber agreed that the system must be built on a rights-based approach because clarity on that matter is urgently needed. As Child Poverty Action Group and the Alliance point out, to have a safe and secure transition, the existing significant detail, the rules about eligibility and meaning of important words already established in case law have to be included in the disability assistance regulations. Anything less risks people having fewer legal rights than they currently have under the reserved benefits system. The definition of safely for PIP, for example, or continual supervision for DLA attendance allowance, and day and night are rights won through decades of case law and regulations which will not automatically apply to the Scottish system. And to rebuild it through case law would lead to years and years of tortuous challenge and appeal through the tribunal system. And I asked the Cabinet Secretary to say in her closing speech whether she's able to set out the level of detail that will be included in regulations. Presiding Officer, 1 in 3 organisations made the call to end the 20-metre rule. It was the most frequently mentioned descriptor in the consultation because it has harmed people financially, it's risked social isolation, and it has hurt people's quality of life. Replicating that rule in Scottish social security would be the antithesis of creating a system built on dignity and respect. So I ask the Chamber today to end that rule when disability for working age people is introduced and move the amendment in my name. Thank you.
I call Alison Johnson for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The devolution of disability benefits is one of the most significant developments on Scotland's devolution journey, and it's appropriate that we're debating the future of disability benefits in Scotland in the 20th anniversary year of this Parliament. This is a precious opportunity to improve the lives of so many of our constituents, as around 540,000 people claim one of the disability benefits that are being devolved. As we've heard, that's around 1 in 10 Scots. Because too many people have been subject to a system that is cruel and inhumane. People have been called into face-to-face assessments that in many cases simply aren't needed. And worse, we know that these assessments can be hugely detrimental to their health and well-being. 79% of respondents to a Disability Benefits Consortium survey report that the stress and anxiety caused by the assessment has actually worsened their condition. And this is particularly concerning for those with mental health issues. Rethink, the mental illness charity, has published the poignantly titled "It's Broken Her" report, which provides case studies of people whose mental health has dramatically worsened as a result of the PIP process. The contempt that the DWP shows for some of the people it is there to help is breathtaking. In other parts of the benefits system, you can be sanctioned just for being minutes late for an appointment. Yet the DWP imposes no time limit on itself whatsoever for deciding internal appeals. The average waiting time is now 69 days, and all the time to wait for a decision that's overturned by tribunals in over 70% of cases. And while some people gain from PIP, in almost half of DLA to PIP reassessment cases, people lose out. 25% are rejected entirely, having previously had an award, and 22% have had their award decreased. In many cases, this is a loss of thousands of pounds. Now, turning to the evaluation report mentioned in the motion, I note the widespread support for reducing unnecessary assessments and reducing travel times to assessments when they are needed, because dragging people halfway across the country to go to an assessment that they don't always need has to end. And this was the message that came from the consultation, with the report noting that a majority regarded face-to-face assessments generally as inappropriate, with many saying that medical evidence or reports should be key to decision-making. We already have the information we need in so many cases. In responses to changes in the law made by Greens, the Scottish Government have committed to significantly reducing the need for face-to-face assessments to the minimum possible, a pledge made by the Cabinet Secretary to me in February. Now, the submission from the Scottish Campaign on the Right to Social Security argues that a fall in the rate of face-to-face assessments from 90% to 30% might be possible. And I'd be grateful if the Cabinet Secretary, when closing, could outline what work has been done since then to establish what an appropriate minimum might be and how it could be ensured. Citizens Advice Scotland have expressed concerns that the Government's draft criteria for when a face-to-face assessment and working age disability assistance would be needed may have been drawn too broadly, and I would ask the Cabinet Secretary to respond to that particular concern. And Green amendments to the Social Security Bill also ensured that ministers consider the distance that a person needs to travel when an assessment is necessary. And the evaluation report is clear. A consistent viewpoint was that the assessment should be local to where the person lives. And I'd invite the Cabinet Secretary to outline how the Government will commit to that today. Amongst respondents, there's been overwhelming support to scrap the 20-metre rule. The MS Society's A Step Too Far report shows that 65% of people surveyed reporting that losing their entitlement made their MS worse, with 39% having to use GP services more as a result. The 20-metre rule was a cynical attempt to reduce spending at the expense of people's needs, and it must end. Greens therefore welcome the Labour amendment to the motion today. It is clear that the current way of determining eligibility is simply not working. As well as the 20-metre rule, many consultees called for an end to the 50% rule. This means that people with conditions that cause serious but infrequent symptoms, such as seizures, might not qualify. So I very much welcome the motion's references to co-designing the new system with people who have lived experience of social security and to putting the needs of disabled people at its very heart. These are very welcome aspirations and they will have major consequences for how the system will develop. For instance, the current system clearly fails to recognise the needs of a great number of people. There wouldn't be so many successful appeals if this weren't the case. Ensuring those needs are recognised and met will require a better system of assessments, but also additional funding, as that more responsive system will inevitably lead to more and higher awards. That's absolutely the right outcome, but it will require government and parliament to ensure that it's properly funded. I still don't think we've had a proper national conversation about the level of social security and therefore the levels of funding we need that we want to have if we're going to call ourselves a compassionate country. That's something that needs to happen soon so that the new system has the political, the public and the financial support that it clearly needs. To close, Presiding Officer, while PIP has worked for some people, for too many it has been an absolute disaster. I know from the casework that comes through my office that it has ruined people's lives. Rebuilding a system that is compassionate, works smoothly and is appropriately funded is going to be one of devolution's biggest challenges. It is a challenge to which this Parliament must rise. Thank you.
I call Alex Cole-Hamilton. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful for this debate this afternoon. The Cabinet Secretary knows that she and I share the same values on this agenda, and I'm grateful for the distance her government has moved this agenda. I would ask from the outset, though, that she reflect on the sequencing and timetabling around this agenda. The government only published its response to the consultation on disability assistance just last night, so I'm not sure that afforded stakeholders preparing briefings for this debate enough time, but nevertheless, we were well served by briefings and organisations have been mentioned already, such as Citizens Advice, Marie Curie and the Child Poverty Action Group. Presiding Officer, each of us carry stories from our casework files about how the current system is not serving our constituents as it might, and indeed how it is undermining what are already very vulnerable lives. It does not contain the humanity that we in this chamber would recognise as being the hallmark of an adequate social security system. Just on Monday, I was having coffee with a friend of mine who has autism, and he was telling me an example of 2 cases in his family, including himself, where they were both struggling with anxiety over the continuance of their disability claims. Firstly, his gran had just lost her mobility car and other parts of his benefit claims due to a reassessment that had been found against her just by 1 point. He had himself been advised that he was about to be reassessed in terms of the functionality of his autism, and he confessed to me, he sort of whispered to me that he felt that his assessor last time had taken pity on him and up-tariffed him from 7 points to 8 so that he could get the benefit, and was worried very much that if it was not the same assessor that he might lose out this time. And as such, his world has been clouded by this threat, this ever-present threat that his livelihood, his ability to sustain would be taken from him. He is a guy who I have a lot of time for, who I'm trying to mentor, but has really struggled to hold down full-time employment. And it is as a result of the anxiety that is resultant from his autism, his particular support needs, that we as a society need to provide him and many others like him with a safety net to allow them to live a thriving life. Because the current assessment regime struggles with hidden disabilities as well. And I think MS has been referenced, and I'm grateful to the MS Society for their briefing. I had another constituent who, on diagnosis, had a very aggressive form of MS, which hit pretty suddenly and without any warning. So obviously started to understand what life was going to look like for him. He went for assessment, but unfortunately, the assessment took place on what he defines as a good day. And as anyone who has friends or family with relapsing remitting MS that you can have good days and bad days. So the assessment is taken as a snapshot, like an opinion poll before an election. It does not tell you what is going to mean for the person at the centre of that assessment. So it is flawed in that reality as well. It's not really geared up, as Jeremy Balfour said, for people with epilepsy. There is no real means of assessing what impact those catastrophic events that people can have in their brains as a result of epilepsy can mean for their functionality, their ability to sustain a job. And you cannot be certain that that will be manifest in any way during an assessment. It doesn't recognise either what autism can do to the size of somebody's social universe. They may have ambulation, they may be able to get about, but actually the realities of their condition may mean that they never, ever leave the house. And it is regrettable that the delay in the introduction of the system will mean that many will have to go through that system again. It is an assessment regime that is both flawed and wrong, and that is empirically verifiable in the fact that of the 84% of decisions that are upheld on mandatory reconsideration, 65% of those are then subsequently overturned by tribunal. Clearly, something is broken in the current assessment regime. They are deeply personal, high stakes, and often humiliating experiences for already vulnerable people. And we all know the horror stories, as I've said earlier, from our constituency casework bags, and those people who are called in again and again, sometimes when they have profound impairment from which they will never, ever get any better. So I'm very grateful for the government taking this on. It feels like we have made some progress here. I do agree with the Labour amendment. I think that the Citizen Advice rightly say that when the walking exercise was cut from 50 to 20 metres, that was a deliberate exercise in trying to cut costs and reduce the number of successful claimants. I would ask the Scottish Government to consider working with stakeholders towards the end of abolishing this kind of assessment altogether. I do agree, and I welcome very much the face-to-face assessments that have to be undertaken, that assessors will declare when they are logging an observation about somebody's capability, so that people on tenterhooks throughout that already traumatic experience and are made aware of what is being recorded as in real time as it is happening. I agree with organisations like Citizens Advice who say that we should shift the system away from those inhumane face-to-face assessments and build a more comprehensive picture of each claimant based on those who know them and the professionals who work with them. Once that assessment has been conducted, Scottish Campaign on Rights for Social Security in their briefing said that each person should have the right to access independent advocacy if they wish to pursue any form of appeal. And there needs to be a mechanism, I fundamentally agree with this, from the Child Poverty Action Group, for a claimant to trigger a review of the claim and what they currently receive, because everybody knows people's conditions can deteriorate rapidly and things may change. So I support the government in this, and the Liberal Democrats will be supporting all amendments tonight.
We now move on to the open debate. We're a bit pushed for time, so speeches of no more than 6 minutes, please. Bob Doris, followed by Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I want to begin by giving a clear example of just how unfit for purpose the current DLA and PIP system is for my constituents, much was alluded to earlier on by Alec Cole-Hamilton. I'm currently representing a constituent in relation to a PIP case. My constituent phoned the DWP in April this year to ask about his current PIP award, which he knew ran out in November 2019. He was told not to worry and he would be sent a form to fill in around the middle of August. All good so far. There would be no disruption to his PIP. When no form arrived in August, my constituent was again reassured he had nothing to worry about and was sent a review form shortly to return to the DWP. However, he has now been told that his PIP would come to an end in November anyway, without any reassessment, and he would have to make a new application. Here's what my constituent told me about the impact on him. I am very concerned that despite being told repeatedly that I'd get a review form and my award would not be interrupted, that I am now facing another Christmas with no PIP, a loss in the severe disability premium on my ESA, and the significant stress this will cause me. For the last 5 years, I've had disruption to either ESA, PIP or DLA, as they'll continually review my applications, even though my diabetes, my depression, neuropathy, chronic pain, arthritis in my knees, high blood pressure, carpal tunnel syndrome and problems with my sight doesn't get any better. It's a constant uphill battle and it's really getting me so down. My constituents have been badly let down by the DWP. I think that's clear for everyone here to see this afternoon. That is why the transfer of powers and getting it right over disability assistance to the Scottish Parliament and to our Scottish Government is so vital. The work the Scottish Government and the Social Security Scotland has carried out in partnership with those with direct and lived experience of receiving social security benefits does give me much confidence that we'll have a far more respectful and fit-for-purpose social security system for those living with disabilities here in Scotland. An environment where the Scottish Government is seeking to co-produce much of that process, the protocols and the principles that underlie it, is taking place here in Scotland today. Key aspects of the new system will include significantly decreasing the number of face-to-face assessments. While there is clear evidence available of a person's condition and circumstances, why does the UK government system needlessly put people through the ordeal of an assessment and reassessment? The Scottish Government will introduce rolling awards for disability assistance of up to 10 years for those clients with conditions that are unlikely to change. I think in particular of the constituent I just referred to in relation to that new way of doing things. Not using private sector contractors to deliver disability assessments and making sure that those conducting them have the appropriate skills is very welcome. I particularly welcome the Scottish Government's acknowledgement that our new system must better capture the needs of those with fluctuating conditions or mental health issues, and the intention to empower those professionals best placed to confirm the existence of such conditions and best placed to be aware of that impact. Yes, briefly.
Jamie Green.
I'm very interested in what the member has to say, and I have some sympathy for the proposals, but can he confirm who therefore would perform those assessments if it's not outsourced to a third sector organisation or a third party? And does he accept the need that there still will be a need for some form of assessment for certain types of claimants?
I don't think it's a brief intervention. Hopefully within that you're accepting the current system doesn't work. I'll be looking forward to the regulations for disability assistance for younger people to be laid in December, and I'll scrutinise those, and hopefully the relevant health professionals and appropriate professionals will be outlined within that. We should come together in consensus to see there's a better way of doing things here in Scotland compared to the rest of the UK. I want to commend this short-term assistance, a new form of support to ensure that those who have an existing entitlement and have it withdrawn following an assessment will continue to get the financial support should they decide to appeal that decision. That's important to prevent a financial cliff edge for people who have done absolutely nothing wrong. Presiding Officer, whilst I give broad support to the Scottish Government on disability assistance, I also chair the Social Security Committee, and we will want to scrutinise in great detail the regulations for the first wave of disability benefits when they are published in draft form in December, as will the Scottish Commission on Social Security. We will also want to look carefully at the guidance in relation to terminal illness. Of course we will. So I give absolutely wholehearted support in relation to the principles underpinning the intention of the Scottish Government, but we will have to scrutinise those details rigorously, and you'd expect us to do that, Presiding Officer. So of course we want to look at the time to appeal, we want to look at the time it will take for appeals to be heard, we want to look at the 20-metre rule, of course we will, and various other aspects. But I also want to make sure that in Scotland we use best practice in the new system. And I want to make the Cabinet Secretary aware of best practice in Glasgow, where at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital there used to be a fast-track application process for PIP in the spinal injuries ward, where a consultant neurosurgeon could provide evidence to DWP, and actually people got their PIP within 8 weeks. That system was running successfully for 3 years. Now actually, centralisation of the processes around that to England means that's now been scrapped by the DWP, and the wait is now up to 30 weeks. That's not appropriate for anyone. I had the opportunity to have a really constructive conversation actually with the new Secretary of State, Therese Coffey, in relation to a variety of matters a couple of weeks ago, and I thank her for that, and I raised this specific issue with her as well. Councillor Alan Gow in Glasgow has been leading on this, and I would ask the Cabinet Secretary if she could also raise this matter with Therese Coffey MP. It's a real example of best practice which can drive down waiting times and get people most in need to receive their benefit. So in Scotland, some right good practice taking place right now. Let's make sure that is percolated right through the new Scottish social security system for those living with disability assistance and needs. Presiding Officer.
Alexander Stewart, followed by Jenny Gilruth.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am delighted to be able to take part in this afternoon's debate on improving disability assistance in Scotland. Given the devolution of disability benefit to the Scottish Parliament, it is timely that we should be considering how we as a society help people living with disabilities. While, of course, individual circumstances vary greatly, and we should be aware that the fact that disabled people face a higher average cost of living each month. Disabled people also may not gain a degree qualification, and we've also found that people and individuals are almost twice as likely to be unemployed if they are living with a disability. For those disabled people who are in work, there remains disability pay gap, with disability and individuals earning about £1.50 per hour less. And that is not acceptable, and that should be looked at and continually move forward. It is clear that the living individuals with disabilities face sufficient barriers and challenges to their everyday life, and we should see a benefit system that does not add to some of those challenges these individuals face. It is therefore clear, and it's also right, that we should support disabled people financially through the benefit system. We in the Scottish Conservatives, Deputy Presiding Officer, believe that there should be prioritised the needs for disabled people and the number of steps that we have taken to ensure that that's the case. And I pay tribute to my colleague Jeremy Balfour, who chairs the cross-party group on disability here in this Parliament, for what has been achieved through that cross-party group. We also brought forward a number of amendments in recent legislation to protect those who were disabled. We sought to amend the Transport Bill to exempt those claiming disability living allowance from having to pay the car park tax. We were also successful in adding provision to the Planning Bill to ensure that more facilities for changing adults in public building toilets are available, which were required in order to gain planning consent. These are good, and these are new measures that are moving forward to try and support individuals. The UK Government has done much to improve their lives and spends around £50 billion a year to support them. They have also listened to the feedback, because there has been criticism, and we know that, of the system. For example, disabled pensioners who will no longer face regular benefit reassessments. It's right that the dignity and the respect is respected in ensuring that they no longer have to face these reassessments. The UK Government has also made tracking loneliness a key priority with the launch of their dedicated strategy to combat loneliness last year. And I also pay tribute to the Scottish Government for what they're trying to achieve in this field. Around half of disabled people in the UK say that they feel lonely. So it's important that we embed ways of tracking loneliness in our policies across governments and across portfolios. While it is clear that today's debate, the support for disabled people, and there's a real ambition to share, and that has been shared across the members who've spoken already, and I'm sure will continue as the debate goes forward, Deputy Presiding Officer, awareness and giving that we should ensure that that takes place. Now, there were assurances given by the then Cabinet Secretary for Social Security that all new devolved benefits would be introduced by the end of the Parliament term. That's in 2021. And we now know that that will not take place and that there will be an extension to that until 2025. This means that it will be almost a decade since powers were received and benefits before they will actually be transformed within the new Scottish Social Security Agency. And the Scottish Government has also had to look at the severe disablement allowance situation, and that because of unforeseen duplication, it may well be handed back. The decision to fast-track the Scottish Government's new child poverty benefit, Scottish Child Payment, has pushed back the progress on other devolved benefits. These include disability assistance for older people and the Scottish Carers Allowance. Social Security Scotland has said that they are under a lot of pressure and there will be some real challenges for them to deal with in the coming years. And Audit Scotland have also indicated and raised some concerns that the Social Security Scotland has routinely been operating with about 30% of its posts unfilled, and that's been leading to a number of contractors. Now, it's very important, if we are to have the new system, that we have the individuals in place that can promote and support that, and I look forward to seeing that coming forward as we go forward, Deputy Presiding Officer. While we have seen the assessment and vacancy rate drop, and that's good, we still have to ensure that we have enough people to continue and process that. So in conclusion, Deputy Presiding Officer, I welcome the opportunity to debate, to scrutinise and to improve disability assessments and assistance for individuals across Scotland. Whilst the devolution of these benefits provides opportunities for us to shape our own system in Scotland that reflects our needs and our priorities, it is also present that some significant challenges remain and also remain to be looked at and ensure that we can support that. We in the Scottish Conservatives will continue to play our part and a constructive role in this debate, because we believe by having that constructive role there will be progress. And as I say, the consensus that we want to see is that all individuals in Scotland are treated with that dignity and that respect, but also get the benefits that they're entitled to. Thank you.
Just before we move on, can I remind members that if they're having private conversations, the acoustics in this chamber are rather good, and they're not always as private as people think. Thank you. And we'll now go on to Jenny Gilruth, to be followed by Pauline McNeill.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today's debate is a timely intervention for all of us, I'm sure, because it provides an opportunity to focus on the day job of this Parliament, and that is to advocate and to improve the lived experiences of all of our constituents. As noted in the Government's response to the consultation on disability assistance in Scotland, the purpose of disability assistance is to provide financial assistance to mitigate some of the increased costs that people incur as a result of having a disability or long-term condition. Disability assistance helps ensure that disabled children and adults are more likely to secure the care and mobility support they need, reducing barriers to their full participation in our communities and improving life opportunities. And as the Government response notes, many disabled people and their families have found the current system complicated to navigate. And as the Cabinet Secretary mentioned previously, the consultation suggests a preference, however, for a person-centred system, moving away from the one-size-fits-all policy advanced by the UK Government. Presiding Officer, I'm sure we've all had examples of constituents who've been sanctioned, those who've amassed rent arrears because one day they've missed the bus to their appointment, those who've fallen through the cracks of the UK Government's welfare system, often because of no fault of their own. The real lived experiences as exemplified by the film I, Daniel Blake. And for disabled people, this complicated landscape presents even more challenges. Today's motion notes that the Scottish Government is co-designing its approach to disability assistance with people who have lived experience of receiving social security payments. So I want to tell the story today of one of my constituents, Conor Beveridge, who is 24 years old and comes from Thornton in Fife. Conor suffers from Friedreich's ataxia. Now, Friedreich's ataxia, or FA, is a recessive genetic disease that causes difficulty in walking, a loss of sensation in the arms and legs, and impaired speech that worsens over time. People may also become completely incapacitated in the latter stages of the disease. And ahead of today's debate, I asked Conor about his experiences of the benefit system, and this is what he told me. I was unable to deal with the news of my disability at 16. I shut it out and I used all my energy to focus on my studies. After school, I went on to study a degree in accountancy at my local college, which helped to deflect from the haunting diagnosis of Friedreich's ataxia. My involvement with the welfare system came once I graduated, and the realisation that my condition and my inability to work began to sink in. My PIP assessment, although degrading, was relatively straightforward. However, my transfer from Job Seekers Allowance to Employment Support Allowance was a different story. I was on JSA for over a year before somebody at the job centre suggested that ESA would be more suitable for me. And I'll always remember how the lady appeared to be giving a telling off to her manager for advising me about ESA. However, that lady was moving jobs the following week, so she wasn't bothered about following the rules. She wanted to be fair to me. Once I applied for ESA, I soon received a letter that I was being put on a waiting list for an assessment. And whilst on that waiting list, I was put on a reduced rate of payment. I was on this waiting list for 15 months. I was financially able to deal with this because I still live with my family and I don't have any significant bills. However, there is currently no medical treatment for Friedreich's ataxia, and I rely on physiotherapy, food supplements and vitamins to be in the best shape I can be. This all had to be cut right down as I simply couldn't afford them anymore. Friedreich's ataxia is a degenerative muscle-wasting disease, so the impact of this period on my health cannot be recovered. I was eventually assessed for ESA. It was backdated for 9 of the 50 months I was on the waiting list, a total of £3,500. Why people with terminal and degenerative conditions like mine need to be put through this process will always beg belief to me. A fairer social security system will only ever be put in place when people realise that and they stop the finger pointing. Alexander Stewart is quite right then to point to the disability pay gap earlier on. But as reported by the Disability News Service in July of this year, the Department for Work and Pensions figures obtained through an FOI request show that disabled people claiming job seekers allowance were more likely to have their benefits sanctioned than non-disabled people. The figures show that when the JSA sanction system was at its most discriminatory in 2009 and 2013, disabled people claiming job seekers allowance were about 50% more likely in 2009 and a third more likely in 2013 to have their benefits sanctioned than non-disabled people claiming the same benefit. The UK government system enshrined discrimination against those with a disability. It enshrined unfairness for those most in need in our society. And according to researcher Anita Bellows, it still does. And commenting in response to a UK parliamentary inquiry in July of this year, she said, "It is not surprising to learn that disabled JSA claimants are being disproportionately sanctioned, as it has been a constant feature of the benefits system that some people, including disabled unemployed people, are seen as soft targets by the DWP." So we have a duty in Scotland to do things better, Presiding Officer. And whilst this consultation is not the end product, it is the next step in a wider programme which will allow the Government to build a system informed by evidence through listening to the views of people with lived experience. We all have a responsibility to be part of that process, to be, have an input into creating a system which is based on dignity, fairness and respect to set the right tone, which, as today's motion notes, puts the needs of disabled people at the heart of Scotland's social security system. Or, as Conor Beveridge put it, a fairer benefit system goes hand in hand with a fairer society for all. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Pauline McNeill, followed by Alistair Allen.
Thank you. This is one of the biggest moments for Scotland's new social security system. And in fact, the disability assistance that we are discussing is one of the biggest moments because it is the one which attracted most controversy under the DWP system and caused misery for many, as others have outlined. When the second wave of benefits were devolved in 2020, or are devolved in 2020-21, it creates a huge opportunity to provide a better system of support for disabled people in Scotland. But as others have said, there's also significant challenges, and we must make sure that we provide the detail and the clarity as we go forward. It's an exciting time in many ways because organisations and the committee have been able to shape the outcome of our new social security system. But we really need to get into the detail of the operation of the agency itself. It is definitely worth emphasising that disabled people in Scotland are more likely to be living in poverty. Nearly a quarter of families, 24% with a disabled member in Scotland, live in relative poverty compared to 17% of families with no disabled members. So it's critically important that there is a smooth transition in the new system, it goes without saying. Inclusion Scotland have noted that there's obviously a real concern amongst disabled Scots about potential delays in the transfer to the new system. But there is also an issue with raised expectations of receiving a better system of support for those who have lost under the current system. And it's quite important, I think, to carefully manage that expectation, but to ensure that there are no delays and the expectations are met in terms of a better and a fairer system. I want to address a couple of specific issues in my contribution. So the issue of redeterminations was a focus for the committee work during the passage of the bill, and is a key difference between the new system and the DWP system. I've welcomed it from the very beginning, but I also welcome the movement from the Government on the timescale for redeterminations, changing the time for a claimant to request such a determination for 31 calendar days to 42. I think it's a positive change. However, I would like to express some concern shared by Inclusion Scotland about the time taken to decide on redeterminations. Now, I do fully appreciate that we need to get it right the second time when there's a challenge. I do think 8 weeks is too long, and I wonder if the Minister would consider exploring whether 6 weeks would be more appropriate. On the question of overpayments, again, we spent a great deal of time during the passage of the bill examining what would happen if there was an overpayment. So the Government's position is clear and helpful on this. So if the overpayment is a result of the Government's fault, then it's not recoverable from the applicant. But if the applicant is to blame for the overpayment, then the detail of how we recover those deductions are absolutely critical. They mustn't be set too high, and they mustn't be over such a short period. And that certainly happens under the current system. Weekly repayments, if are set at too high a level, can of course cause acute financial hardship and have unnecessary dreadful results. We know that there have been reports of people who have had to resort to food banks and suffer an intense level of stress because of that. So I think it is quite important also to acknowledge that there are some amongst the disabled group that wouldn't be or shouldn't be expected to notice overpayments, such as those with learning disabilities. It would be helpful if the Minister could say something about that. As others have expressed some concern about the assessments used to determine mobility eligibility, I also agree with Inclusion Scotland that there should be a substantial cut in face-to-face assessments, because that can cause unnecessary stress and anxiety. And again, I think the Scottish Government have to be commended for making that such a commitment. A face-to-face assessment is going to be difficult for many people with many conditions. For example, like MS or arthritis, where symptoms fluctuate, and a paper-based report from a medical professional could not only remove the possible stress caused by a face-to-face assessment, but deliver a more accurate appraisal of that person's condition. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, Mark Griffin has highlighted in the Labour Amendment that it is vitally important that there is a change to the 20-metre rule. This was a reduction from the previous 50-metre requirement, which took place, though all but one of the 173 organisations which responded to the UK Government consultation on PIP advised against the change. So we would like that further explored. We have reached a critical stage in the delivery of Scotland's new social security system. Our ability to deliver on the detail is the test of whether or not we can meet the promises of a system which has dignity and respect for those who rely on it. There's a lot more work to do, but I believe working together with the government, we can seriously create a good social security system for the people of Scotland.
I call Alistair Allen to be followed by Jamie Halcrow-Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The creation of a new agency, Social Security Scotland, with responsibility for at least part of the benefits system in Scotland, provides us, as Pauline McNeill has just said, with an opportunity to do things differently from the way things have been done in the past, and differently from the way they often are still done in many of the areas of the social security system for which Westminster retains responsibility today. Now, the failings of parts of those remaining UK-controlled areas of the system are only too obvious, and indeed are a regular subject of this Parliament's Social Security Committee's scrutiny. An obvious example would be the implementation of universal credit. But sticking, however, for the moment to those benefits that relate specifically to disability and fitness for work, like many other members, and Bob Doris and Alex Cole-Hamilton have beaten me to this, but like many other members, I am sure I have cases of constituents who many years ago were given a disability-related benefit for life, an acknowledgement of a lifelong or degenerative condition, and who now find themselves subject to reassessments, in the words of one of my constituents, to verify whether miracles have taken place in the meantime. So as more and more disability-related benefits come under Scotland's control over the course of the next 2 years, an important principle has already been laid down, namely that dignity must be at the heart of our approach. I believe that we are now starting to see that principle being embedded into Scotland's new social security system. By 2021, the Scottish Government will roll out 3 new programmes for disability assistance for children and young people, which will replace the Disability Living Allowance for children, disability assistance for working age people, which will replace personal independence payments, and disability assistance for older people, which will replace attendance allowance. The focus of the Scottish Government has been on overseeing a smooth transition as Social Security Scotland begins the administration of these benefits. Now, as Scotland's Social Security Secretary Shirley-Ann Somerville has said, our new social security system is the largest piece of public sector delivery since devolution, and we are making real progress. By the end of this year, Social Security Scotland will be delivering 7 benefits, and these plans demonstrate the progress being made as we get ready to take responsibility for disability payments next year. The Scottish Government has, as we've heard, made a number of commitments in these areas, and it's right that we examine them and, as has been said, look for detail. But it is important to look at what these commitments are. Inclusive communication, disability assistance will not be means tested, and in line with this, a person's employment status will have no effect on their entitlement. A holistic, person-centred approach. Social security staff involved in making decisions about eligibility will undergo robust training. to reflect the agency's values of dignity, fairness and respect. However, Presiding Officer, I want to concentrate among all of that briefly on one area in which Scotland can aim to do things differently, and that is around the way the system treats applicants with mental health problems. As Sam H has observed in the briefing which they sent last week to all MSPs, the current assessment and decision-making process for PIP is not working for people with mental health problems. The assessment process, particularly the face-to-face medical assessment, is contributing to people's distress and does not adequately assess the impact of mental health problems or other fluctuating conditions. One of the most significant issues contributing to the problems of the current PIP system is the assessor's lack of understanding of or experience in mental health. And these, of course, are the words of Sam H, but words that are also echoed in similar comments from Mind, their sister charity in England. So we broadly, I think, all of us welcome the proposals from the Scottish Government, as has Sam H indeed welcomed them, on disability assistance assessments as they are outlined in the Government's Disability Assistance Assessments position paper. And I hope that the needs of applicants with mental health problems are but one of the considerations among many in building a new system, but I believe it is an important one that is worthy of concentrating on today. Presiding Officer, last week we saw a bit of a media debate about the kind of views about poor people and social security which the Conservative Social Security spokesperson saw fit to share on social media. I accept, Presiding Officer, that we all click the wrong button on Facebook from time to time. I am sure that is all it was. By way of contrast, however, I hope that by putting rights front and centre now, we are all of us giving a clear signal about what kind of social security system we want to build in Scotland.
Thank you very much. I call Jamie Halker-Johnson to be followed by George Adam. Mr Halker-Johnson, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. It's vital that this Parliament and the Scottish Government get support for people with disabilities right. With that in mind, it's perhaps worth reflecting on the extent of powers over disability support that have been devolved to this Parliament in recent years. Disability support is just one of the many areas where further devolution has taken place under the Scotland Act 2016. It's a process that's far from over, and those powers that have been newly devolved are often still bedding in. The change this represents to our devolution settlement is not to be underestimated. Now, it's no secret that the Scottish Government has been critical of the UK Government's approach on disability benefits. It now has the powers to do things differently, but it also has the associated responsibility which that brings. It's unfortunate that transition has been fraught with delays. This has been well publicised, and I'm not going to rehash the details now. But it should be instructive to the SNP ministers not to underestimate the challenges of taking on these benefits, nor the complexity of the decisions that have to be made. Today, the Conservatives will be seeking commitments to avoid further delays and to ensure that transitional guarantees are provided to recipients. But this is only part of the equation. As my party spokesman on skills and employability, I've been very impressed by the work done by government, by employers and by the third sector to support independent living and improve access to work for people with disabilities. In my own region, there are a number of third sector organisations that do excellent work in these areas. And I outline this as a reminder that when dealing with social security, it's important at all stages that we should remember these benefits should be a gateway to independence rather than a solution in themselves. Most people with disabilities want to live independently, to succeed in lives they have chosen for themselves, and to overcome challenges. That should be the primary role of government, to help people achieve their ambitions, to support them with their aspirations, and allow everyone in our communities an equal chance to reach their potential. We've seen schemes like Access to Work change the lives of thousands of people with disabilities who are accessing the labour market. These combined efforts across government, across business and across the third sector have brought forward some major changes, with an additional 1.2 million people with disabilities in work, with all the expertise and the effort and the enthusiasm they bring, changing the shape of the UK labour force extensively in the last 6 years alone. That approach reflects those principles that the Scottish Government has pointed to on social security support: independence, dignity and fairness. Now, I've spoken about getting the principles behind supports and benefits right. It is, however, also important that this Parliament has further opportunities to scrutinise the detail of the Scottish Government's proposals and that the administrative hurdles to devolving these benefits are met. We know, for example, the issues around building the new Social Security Agency with its hub in Dundee. Again, it suggests that the planning for devolution of these benefits by the government simply has not been thorough enough. This is despite years that have now elapsed between the Smith Commission, the 2016 Scotland Act, and the beginning of serious bilateral work between the UK and Scottish governments. The analysis of responses published by the Scottish Government has shown the extent of these new powers. Ministers are now in a position to direct transformational change if that's what they're seeking. In several cases, there was clear consensus on the way forward. The Scottish Government will have to outline its approach in due course. We can, of course, look to the Scottish Government's past record to see how similar issues have been handled previously. For example, we're continuing to monitor the progress of the new employability schemes that are still in their early stages after replacing the transitional arrangements. And I've raised a number of early concerns about how effective these have been for people with disabilities. And it's worth remembering that we still have a significant disability employment gap here in Scotland. The employment rate for people living with a disability is nearly half of the non-disabled population. We also know from the summer's figures produced from the Scottish Government as part of its Scotland Wellbeing publication that there is an equally significant pay gap. A person with a disability in Scotland can expect to earn, on average, £1.50 an hour less than a non-disabled person. This is particularly concerning when the higher costs of living with a disability are taken into account. An effective welfare system will provide support in these areas, but there will always be circumstances in which the full costs of disability are unpredictable and difficult to meet. And they're not also universal but individual. In the Highlands and Islands, for example, we often find that people with disabilities face additional challenges, particularly in the remote and rural parts of my region. Transport can be problematic, even accessing public services. Greater numbers of small businesses may have less experience in supporting customers and employees with disabilities. That is why some of the work being carried out by the Job Centre Plus network through Disability Confident has started to make a significant difference. Presiding Officer, it is important that disability is considered across the work of the public sector here in Scotland. On the principles behind disability support, there's a great deal of agreement across this chamber. The real challenge for the Scottish Government is to convert these principles into a coherent system that works for people with disabilities. With the Scottish Government's previous attacks on the UK Government's record in this area, they've raised expectations that they have serious ideas that can make a real difference. With that in mind, it's perhaps surprising that one of the main findings of its analysis document has been perception that its proposals are relatively timid. In any case, it is high time that the Scottish Government formulated proposals rather than just principles, and acted in bringing them forward sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Mr Halker-Johnson. I call George Adam to be followed by David Stewart. Mr Adam, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We're at the beginning of a new challenge for our Scottish Parliament, as Pauline McNeill already mentioned earlier, and it's emotional for me from the perspective of my wife has multiple sclerosis, and I've worked with disabled groups all through my political life, and the fact that we're moving down this road even further is quite an emotional one for me. And I'm trying not to just get stuck into the Tories, Presiding Officer. I don't want to do a cut and paste effort of previous speeches on this issue. I'm trying to be a better person, trying to be a bigger person, but they don't make it easy, Presiding Officer. They come here and they start trying to treat the Scottish Government with different ways and a different playing field from their own government. They defend one and they say there's difficulties with other ones and challenges, but they don't actually see the difference in the challenges that we've got. And as many of my colleagues have already said, the current system in Westminster, the current DWP system, has been an unmitigated disaster in our communities. Can I just finish this point? I'll finish this point and I'll let you in. And the UK Government has been putting their ideals ahead of the people that we represent. Now, I could effectively say it's about the past, the present and the future. We're almost at Christmas now, so it's almost time for a Christmas carol. But it's the past where it's effectively the heartlessness of the Tory regime. and the present, where it's important for us to get it right, to learn from these mistakes and get it right. Take our time, not just press a big... I think some people in this room think there's a big red button somewhere that you press it and all of a sudden that's it. The money's going to magically appear in everybody's account and everybody's going to be okay. You know, and the future is all about dignity and respect. And that's the place where we should be coming from in this debate. And I'll take Mr Balfour now.
I'm grateful...
Oh, wait a minute, I call you. I know you're dead keen, Mr Balfour. Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you, Deputy President Officer. And can I thank Mr Adams for your taking my intervention. I accept that the process may be different, but does Mr Adams believe that once everything is up and running here in Scotland, more people will be getting PIP than get it at the moment? Yes or no?
George Adams.
I think Mr Balfour misses my point. The point is that people in Scotland will be treated for the first time in this situation with dignity and respect. Their situation will be taken into account, as opposed to the current system where it was just a number exercise, number crunching. People didn't come into it. The individuals at the end were not thought of. It was just a case of get down the number of people that are claiming on. And for a Conservative member to actually come and ask that question when they know fine well exactly what's been happening with their government is an absolute disgrace. And when you're looking at this whole system for the future, you know, the Cabinet Secretary herself said, Shirley Ann Somerville said, I've heard from too many ill and disabled people who currently know only the stigma, stress and anxiety when it comes to accessing welfare support and fear the dreaded brown envelope from the Department of Work and Pensions. That's the thing that we're dealing with here. It's the dreaded brown envelope. That's the real-life situation, not the debating society ideal that we're maybe having in here. We're talking about real people living real lives, and that's what they dread, is that brown envelope coming in here. So if you've got a system that's based on dignity and respect, it gives you an opportunity to actually, from day one, and let's not forget, we've all been on the committee, we know that was the foundations of the system that we are setting up. And one of the most important things, it's been really good here today to hear so many people talk about multiple sclerosis, because my wife Stacey, who has MS, is constantly saying not enough of us talk up the good work that the MS Society is doing and how MS affects people in Scotland. But one of the problems with that as well is the fact that no two people with multiple sclerosis has the same condition. It's not the same for every single individual there. That's why the Scottish Government has said that they will do it on a person-based system. Now, that's more important than the one-size-fit-all process that people are currently going through now, because people aren't like that. Humanity isn't like that. We actually do have to deal with this situation on a person-by-person basis, because if that's one condition that actually has all these different ideas. And I can mention many others. I was at the National Huntington's Association of Scotland yesterday, and they too have, in their condition, different people all have different symptoms for every part of the condition as well. You know, so not everything is a one-size-fit-all. And I think that's one of the things that's been one of the faults in the previous system. We've actually been looking at, here's just a system of social security. We'll just put this forward and we'll just take it from there. It's got to be person-based, and it's got to be with the people at the heart of it. And that's why I'm glad that the Scottish Government are actually sitting there looking at and listening to people who are living with it. Because as I said, it's about real life and people that are living with this situation. We can talk here for hours on end, but it's about delivery. And it's not just about delivery, presiding officer, and the fact that, you know, we've got it delivered and that's it. It's doing it properly, because there is far too much at stake. We need to take our time. We need to get this right. And it would be 10 times easier if the Scottish Government had been given all the powers of social security. They could have designed something from start. But they don't have that, and now we've got to deal with what we've got and navigate that. So let's all remember in this debate, first and foremost, we are not important in this debate. The people we serve and the people who are claiming these benefits, they're the ones that are important.
Thank you, Mr Adam. I call David Stewart, to be followed by Joan McAlpine. Mr Stewart, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I welcome this timely debate. The devolution of social security is, of course, a great opportunity to create a greenfield site which reflects our key core principles. But what we need to do, Presiding Officer, is to end the adversarial nature of the current system. But we need to restate that social security is the bedrock of the welfare state. And we need to go back into our history. Look at the Beveridge Report of 1942, which aimed to slay the 5 giants on the road to reconstruction of want, disease, ignorance, squalor and disease. And that, of course, led to the Attlee government's world-leading creation of our NHS and social security system. But we need to get the philosophy right. Social security is an investment in our communities, not a drain on the exchequer. It's a step up, not a hand out. It's a universal human right, and it's reflected in legislation across Europe and beyond. And we, as politicians, irrespective of the party and irrespective of who's spoken today, we all have a responsibility of ensuring that those with the greatest need are targeted with the most urgent help. And of course, Presiding Officer, I understand that any new system needs to be efficient, but efficient does not have to mean bureaucratic, uncaring or remote, and the 20-metre rule comes to mind. But I do support the Scottish Government's intention to include a new benefit take-up campaign. I remember the first-class work carried out by the welfare rights teams across Scotland in the 1980s, particularly in Strathclyde and Lothian, to raise take-up of benefits for those with disabilities. And I'd like to congratulate the current work being carried out today by Citizen Advice and the independent advice centres across the country on disability benefits. And now that I mention CAB, I would like to ask the Cabinet Secretary in her closing remarks whether to confirm further existing case law is going to be incorporated into regulations as called for by CAB, CPAG and others, and including my colleague Mark Griffin in his earlier contributions. But, Presiding Officer, the 3 words I want to focus in is in the government motion today, which are dignity, fairness and respect. Is it not shocking that in Scotland in 2019 there are so many people who do not receive all or even any of these 3 characteristics every day from a system reportedly there to help? And according to Inclusion Scotland's findings from the recent consultation, and I quote, "Disabled people have told us repeatedly and clearly that they are not treated with dignity and respect within the current UK benefits system. Instead, disabled people are mistrusted, scapegoated and suffer from the erosion of levels of payment, conditionality and sanctions. They also describe being subjected to never-ending series of intrusive, inadequate, inaccurate and degrading assessments. So I would restate, people living with disabilities deserve dignity, fairness and respect every single day. And at a time when they are not, particularly when it comes to much-needed disability assistance, then it's time for all of us to take a serious look at ourselves in the mirror. So I welcome the Scottish Government's proposal to implement a person-centred approach to decisions around disability assistance, which I've heard from several sources is all too often missing during the current applications process. But as the symptoms of particular disabilities mean they can show differently day by day, depending on when an assessor visits, one good day can mean that someone misses out on the benefits they need for all the many bad days. That was reflected, I think, on earlier comments by Alec Cole-Hamilton in his individual contribution. But the current over-reliance on face-to-face assessments in order to receive PIP not only fails to take that into account, but the pressure on an assessment can mean increased fatigue, stress and anxiety and other mental health pressures on people already dealing with complex health issues. Now, we had an excellent briefing from MF Society. I would particularly like to thank George Adam for his personal account. I think that was very illuminating on the particular issues of facing MS. He will know much better than I do from the feedback from MS Society that it's a very complex condition, which includes many symptoms which are invisible, pain, fatigue and cognitive issues, as well as very sensitive aspects such as bladder and bowel problems. So one key aspect then is from Scottish Labourers, we are calling for the scrapping of the 20-metre rule. Now, mobility is such an integral part of living, access to services, basic needs as well as social needs, that just being able to make it to the 20 metres is no sign that disability assistance is not needed. Now, without adequate support for mobility, people can become housebound, massively reducing their quality of life, likely to reduce their quality of physical health, as well as increasing the chances of depression and loneliness. And from the responses, as we've heard earlier, to the government's consultation, it's clear, and I quote, whether a person can stand and move more than 20 metres is overly simplistic and lacks consideration in scenarios individuals will encounter in their everyday life. It was an issue that attracted the highest number of calls for change in all responses, including 1 in 3 organisations. So we must be looking at this as a matter of urgency, and that's why we on this side of the chamber focused our amendment on it. I'm conscious of time, Presiding Officer, so we should be taking full advantage of the devolution of social security to the Scottish Government to redesign a disability assistance process that makes dignity, fairness and respect a reality for those who need to access benefits. We need to be removing barriers that can prevent people with disabilities participating fully in society. And as Robert Hansel said, my disability has opened my eyes to see my true abilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call Joan McAlpine to be followed by Tom Mason. Ms McAlpine, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm particularly pleased to speak in this debate because I was a member of the Welfare Reform Committee of this Parliament, which reported in 2015 on the priorities for a new social security system for Scotland. And the evidence we took in committee back then was quite heartbreaking, although members right across the chamber know that already from their casework. The report produced by the former Welfare Reform Committee made it clear that the Westminster model was broken and that thousands of the most vulnerable people in Scotland were being let down. People with disabilities told us that DLA and PIP processes were cumbersome, difficult to navigate and judgmental. Cost-cutting as DLA transferred to PIP meant that people have had their benefits cut or lost altogether. And most shocking was the way that the evidence of professionals was dismissed and that people who clearly had life-limiting conditions such as major stroke or serious muscular skeletal conditions were denied the support that they deserved. We argued in that committee report that the devolution of some social security powers means that we had an opportunity to claw back the dignity, fairness and respect missing from the UK model, and I'm very pleased that the Scottish Government has grabbed that opportunity with both hands. 10% of Scotland's population require assistance to overcome some of the barriers that disability has put in their way, and I'm pleased that the Scottish Government has worked closely with those people via experience panels and more, and has committed to embed dignity, fairness and respect at the heart of the disability assistance plans for Scotland. The analysis of the Disability Assistance Consultation provides additional material to help build a fair and transparent system that everyone in the country wants. I'm particularly pleased to see that a number of clear changes in approach have come out of the consultation. In particular, I welcome the proposal for a simplified application form, the enhanced role for carers in the provision of evidence as well as professionals, and I welcome the greater choice and control over the timing and location of assessments, with home-based assessments provided where required. And I welcome the reduction in face-to-face assessments, which we all know have been very humiliating for many people. Although the audio recording, I very much welcome that. I believe that it will make a material difference in cases that we all know where people have been treated in a very degrading way. I have a dreadful case in my region of a young person with a severe form of epilepsy who cannot be left alone because of several seizures a day, and the assessors appeared to doubt the severity of the condition when that young person went to see them with their parents. And it was very clear that they were completely ignorant and insulting towards her, and it resulted in the family actually walking out of the assessment and doing without the financial support that was needed. I believe if that assessment had been recorded, the outcome would have been very different. Of course, I welcome the commitment from the Scottish Government that profit-making companies will not be involved in carrying out assessments for disability payments. That was a recommendation of the committee. I also, like others, was very pleased to hear that people with long-term conditions, lifelong conditions, will not have to undergo the indignity of repeated assessments. We have all helped constituents have been experienced that, but I also have experienced my own family of a close relative with a congenital chromosomal condition causing serious learning disability who was moved from DLA to PIP several years ago, meaning that the family had to complete the complicated 35-page form, get lots of supporting letters and arguing that a face-to-face assessment would be deeply damaging and inappropriate. And it was a long, complex, tiring process, but we got through it. And then 18 months later, we were told that my relative was being reassessed and that the award was for a limited period only. And I argued that case at every level, pointing out that even UK government ministers had stood up in Parliament and given commitments to stop mandatory reassessments for people with lifelong conditions. But none of the people that I spoke to wanted to know. Indeed, they seemed completely ignorant of the fact that chromosomal conditions were specifically named as one type of condition that didn't require reassessment. That brought home to me a real lack of training and expertise, which I hope will be addressed in the changes going forward, the Scottish Government's proposal. I had to go through the whole process again, the 35-page form, and as well as wasting a lot of my time, perhaps much more importantly, all the medical professionals and the support workers and the social workers all had to be contacted again for their written evidence, so their precious time was wasted. And at the end of that process, after I filled in the form a couple of years ago, I never heard anything again. So they didn't even have the courtesy to get back and tell me what the outcome was. And I think that kind of encapsulates the lack of respect towards claimants and their families that's embedded in the current system. And it's why I believe that the Scottish Government's commitment to case manager training is so important. And I'd also like to echo the points made by other speakers that the system must take into account fluctuating conditions. And I would also like to commend the briefing that we got on that particular area of concern by MS Scotland, which went into some detail that others have outlined as to how that particular condition can fluctuate. And it was certainly something that came across very strongly back in 2015 in the evidence that we took from people with a variety of conditions. The committee heard that the fact that the conditions can fluctuate just didn't seem to be taken into account by the system at all. So in conclusion, I would like to welcome the system. It would be better if we had control of all social security in Scotland so that we could design a system that worked for everyone. But I have absolutely no doubt that the system we do design will be a material improvement for what people are enduring at the moment.
Thank you. I call Tom Mason to be followed by Bill Kidd. Mr Kidd is the last speaker in the open debate. Mr Mason.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As further powers over welfare are devolved to this Parliament, it is important that we take the opportunity to discuss how best to incorporate them in the Scottish welfare structure. I welcome the chance to do so today. Disability assistance benefits are some of the most important we can legislate for, given that those who rely on them are most likely to be unemployed and less likely to be economically active than people without a disability. Now, the three welfare payments under discussion today replace key benefits currently delivered by the Department of Work and Pensions. Whilst there is not sufficient time to touch upon all the different consultation responses, I hope to mention as many as I can. Disability assistance for children and young people replaces the disability living allowance with a view to extending the provision up to 18 years of age for those who are able to receive it at 16 and continue to meet the relevant criteria. I understand that the consultation responses were broadly supportive of a number of the ideas that the Scottish Government intends to put in place. The change to 18-year-olds was well supported, although some respondents felt that this should be extended further, perhaps to 21. I would sound a note of caution here and personally think that someone at that age should be considered of working age so that their disability can be assessed within that context. Concerns were also raised in respect of winter heating assistance, the need for a blanket payment, the possibility of means testing, and the difference in criteria proposed between it and the winter fuel payments for older people. And I hope the Government will reflect further on these points. Disability assistance for working age people, as opposed to current PEP system, seem to attract much more varied responses, with a significant body of opposition to a points-based assessment system. I do see merits in such an approach, but I hope that when it is being designed, it is done so with sufficient flexibility to ensure that the system reflects the variance in the circumstances that people face. A second theme that appeared to develop was a concern attached to how mental health is viewed in terms of assessment for disability benefits. It is, of course, the case that mental health has rightly been more prominent in recent years than perhaps was the case before. Therefore, a holistic approach that reflects both physical and mental health should be at the forefront of our thoughts. Finally, disability assistance for older people featured as a third benefit that will become a devolved matter, replacing the attendance allowance. Unfortunately, the consultation was not as thorough on this point. However, the responses are still valuable, particularly concerning mobility, something also raised when discussing working age support. These are ideas that merit further reflection over the coming months. Now, these will, I hope, prove to be positive steps going forward. However, I do feel I should mention some concerns, one of which is the delay to the Scottish Carers Allowance, which is now being pushed back to 2022. I have seen at first hand through my family the effect that disability has, not just on the individual, but on all those around them. It is important that we make sure the message coming from this Parliament is that we value all who care for people, but I'm afraid that some of those affected might look at these delays and assume otherwise. These Wave 2 benefits will undoubtedly put more strain on Social Security Scotland, and I cannot say that it has been easygoing for a new welfare agency up until this point. In May of this year, Audit Scotland identified that more than 30% of posts at the SSS were left empty. I now understand that the Minister has indicated this percentage has dropped. However, it speaks to a lack of advanced workforce planning in an organisation where this simply should not be the case. It is not as these changes stack up on anyone unexpected. Sorry, it is not as though these changes snuck up on anyone unexpectedly. Presiding Officer, these debates around the provision of devolved benefits are of course important, and we all want to see them delivered as best as possible. It is an emotive subject, no doubt, but we should be prepared to engage in good faith and work together where consensus can be found. With that in mind, I hope that progress can be made to scrutinise and improve disability assistance in Scotland, and look forward to further opportunities in the months ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr Mason. I call Bill Kidd, then we move to closing speeches. Mr Kidd, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Today, we have come together to thoroughly debate different aspects relating to the devolution of disability assistance to the Scottish Government. In this contribution, I want to again highlight the importance of a rights-based approach which puts the needs of people living with disability first and has dignity woven throughout. We have the opportunity to build and shape a new system that creates trust and reflects our comprehension of how this type of benefit is crucial to the healthy functioning of a democratic and wealthy nation of people. The devolution of disability assistance allows us to create a system that works for people and not against them, and presumes first and foremost that those benefiting from this assistance are indeed in need of help and not just trying to cheat the system. The undeniable context of this debate is that there has been growing concern internationally at the treatment of disabled people in the UK as a whole, particularly in light of Brexit and recent UK government welfare reforms. Whilst I want to look to the future and how we can make things function better now that this is in the hands of the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government, it is important to recognise that damaging policies have made life harder for the 1 in 5 adults who have a disability. In October last year, the Equality and Human Rights Commission reported to the United Nations on the erosion of the rights of disabled people in the UK. The report cited deeply concerning evidence that nearly 14 million disabled citizens are seeing their lives worsen right across the UK. More disabled people live in poverty than non-disabled people, and more are bullied in schools. The report goes on to say that disabled people have been hit harder by welfare reform. In addition, it says that they also experience increasing barriers to finding work and are paid less when they do. These facts matter to people. They essentially and especially matter in the context of a rights-based discussion about disability assistance, as this is developed for Scotland. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights says that across the world, persons with disabilities face discrimination and barriers that restrict them from participating in society on an equal basis with others every day. Moreover, a disproportionate number of persons with disabilities live in developed countries and are often marginalised and in extreme poverty. What this means for the Scottish Parliament is that we have to ensure we build a system that responds to the unique barriers frequently faced by the 1 in 5 adults living with a disability. And we need to build a system that is fair and allows people to participate in society as fully as possible and access all of their rights. In terms of our ability to instil positive change, I am pleased that this process is already informed by the Social Security Experience panels, and I am pleased also to see the Scottish Government's incorporation of recommendations made by the Disability and Carers Benefits Expert Advisory Group. This advisory group is independent of the Scottish Government and is comprised of experts all championing the needs and rights of disabled people. And I welcome the proposed changes to the face-to-face assessments away from DWP practice. These changes would see the frequency of face-to-face assessments dramatically lowered to only happen when absolutely necessary. They would also allow another person of the applicant's choice to be present at the assessment. I support the recourse to look for as many supporting documents to the application as possible for initial assessment and subsequent reviews, and their incorporation and weight when making a final decision after any face-to-face assessment which may be required. This will ensure that unnecessary interviews are done away with and stress is minimised. We know that stress exacerbates physical and mental health conditions, so the last thing we want to do is make the review process harder or more taxing than it absolutely needs to be. We can put an end to the feeling of financial cliff edge moments by creating a more dignified, tailored and rights-based system. Simply put, we can make disability assistance part of a system that is there to help. Together, here in Scotland, we can build a new way of delivering benefits through an approach of rights and respect for human beings. And I thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving to closing speeches, I have a little time in hand, so the closing speech will be glad to know they've got an extra minute. I call Alec Rowley to close for Labour, please. Mr Rowley, 7 minutes or thereabouts.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I was quite pleased that a number of MSPs highlighted Bob Doris, Jenny Gilruth, Bill Kidd, Joan McAlpine, all highlighted much of what's wrong with the current DWP and the system that is in place at the present time. And we should remember that that system and the changes to that system have been ideologically driven. And I note that George Adam wasn't wanting to talk and have a go again at the Conservative Party. But I think it's right that every time we discuss social security and we discuss the systems that are in place, that we make clear that the actions of the Tory government in Westminster and their welfare reform is causing widespread poverty across Scotland, and all the evidence points to the fact that people with disabilities have come off worst. I really cannot understand how Jeremy Balfour can stand up here and accuse the Scottish Government of warm words when he sees the damage. It must be visible in it is visible in every community across Scotland, the damage that the Tories are doing to the most vulnerable in Scotland. Happy to do so.
Jeremy Balfour.
I'm grateful. I mean, I put the same point as I made to Mr Adams. The process may change, but does the opposition party, does the Labour Party believe that the government will have more people on PIP when we introduce this? The process may change, but will more people be on PIP? Surely that's the key question.
Alec Rowley.
I think the answer to that would probably be yes, but I would have to say that it's about the damage that's been done to people's lives right now. You can see where the case for more and more powers for the DWP coming to Scotland can be made when we look at what a Tory government in Westminster has done. And I seriously do not understand how the Tories can come in here and justify what a Westminster government is doing and then challenge in terms of Scotland, where we couldn't actually do worse, but we're doing much better. That said, there was a number of briefings that came in today that I think has demonstrated that whilst most organisations in Scotland welcome the way that social security is being developed, there is a lot more that can be done and can be done now. And one example of that I thought was really good was the conclusion of the MS Society Scotland. Because they say, and I want to quote this because I think it is important, they say, in a balanced way, it is too easy to be critical at a time of such a massive undertaking as the devolution of existing and creation of new benefits. This is not our intention, so we wish to recognise the positive changes that have been proposed. And in setting out those positive changes, they say to reduce the number of face-to-face assessments, to introduce longer-term awards, to reduce complexity of the assessment form, the introduction of a new short-term assistance. So those are welcome steps that the Scottish Government have taken. But the MS Society go on to say, that said, we believe there is still much work to be done to ensure that the commitment to treating people with dignity, fairness and respect becomes a daily reality for people living with MS who are engaging with the Scottish social security system. They go on, we believe the Scottish Government's intentions are genuine, and we had hoped that the early rhetoric would be translated into more extensive positive change. However, in too many examples, that hasn't been the case. Failure to make significant changes to the replacement benefit for PIP, such as removing the 20-metre rule for mobility assessment, will leave the Scottish Government open to the challenge that it is simply introducing PIP in a kilt. I hope the Minister will respond to that. That's why Labour's amendment today addresses that issue. As Mark Griffin said, we have not come forward and said replace it, go back to the 20-metre to the 50-metre that was in place previously. We've said we need to recognise that this is an issue. It's an issue that every briefing, every organisation has raised, and we would leave it open to the government to consult on how best we can actually move from the position which is clearly criticised by all these organisations as the 20-metre, and I do hope that the Minister will respond to that and indeed support Labour's amendment today, which recognises that that is an issue. So this has been a good debate. As I say, I can't quite get over the nerve of the Tories and their cheek to come in here and criticise a system that is far, far superior to the ideologically driven attacks that are taking place on the most vulnerable, the disabled, the elderly and communities in Scotland. So let's work together. The government have made good progress, that's widely acknowledged, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Mr Rowley, and I call on Michelle Ballantyne to close the Conservative. 7 minutes, please, Ms Ballantyne.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The consultation on disability and the Scottish Government's response actually do make really interesting reading, and I think there's some very good points in there. There's some very good debate around, to go forward in terms of what we can deliver in Scotland. And I think it's an excellent starting point in terms of developing the regulations that the Scottish Government will hopefully bring forward next year. In summing up, I want to pick up on some of the key points that have been raised today within this debate. And it's been an interesting debate. I think it deteriorated slightly towards the end. But there were some very valuable points that have been brought forward. And it is, without a doubt, when we're looking at it, probably one of the most challenging devolution of powers that this Parliament has had to deal with. And I think few would disagree that the devolution of disability assistance does offer an opportunity to build a bespoke system for Scotland. And I think it would be fair to say that everybody in the Chamber is rooting for that to be a success. The Cabinet Secretary has outlined again today that Social Security Scotland is now delivering benefits, and that is welcomed. But as many members have highlighted, it is going to be that wave two. It is the devolution of disability assistance that is going to be the most challenging for the new agency. And I think it's actually beholden on all of us, and I probably reflect a little bit on David Stewart's contribution there, not to be overly adversarial around this, because there are a lot of people that are dependent on us as a Parliament getting it right. And therefore, I think we should make sure that when we are exploring it, when we are looking at the regulations as they come forward, that our scrutiny of it is about scrutinising to get right. Certainly, you know, it's not in my intention to do opposition for opposition's sake, because that is neither helpful nor encouraging in terms of ensuring that we do get a good social security system in Scotland. In his amendment today, Jeremy Balfour calls for a commitment from the Scottish Government that there will be no further delay to the devolution of disability benefits. And the Cabinet Secretary has acknowledged that the creation of the new system is challenging, and safe and secure transition is absolutely an important priority, and one we would certainly support. And she talked about the need to work closely and effectively with the DWP to ensure that there is a smooth and timely transition. And at the risk of sounding like a bit of a broken record on this, I do want to just raise again the issue that the then Secretary of State for Work and Pensions raised in August, that the provision of assessments for PIP and its Scottish replacement by the DWP under the current arrangements are potentially time limited. The Cabinet Secretary has previously indicated that the introduction and acceleration of the Scottish Child Payment wouldn't impact on the timetable of the devolution of disability benefits. But there has obviously been some concerns raised by the Auditor General in her most recent report over some of the operational weaknesses at Social Security Scotland, particularly around case management. And additionally, a quick look at the Work for Scotland website, where the Scottish Government posts its vacancies, shows that a raft of key roles, particularly those in finance and policy managers, have not been filled. The Auditor General warned in May that there was a lack of trained financial staff at Social Security Scotland, but still 6 months on, many of these employees are not in place. Whilst at the same time, the Scottish Government's own position papers tell us that they expect to have to train and onboard large volumes of new staff they expect to require for the Scottish Child Payment. So I would be grateful, therefore, if the Cabinet Secretary would update the Chamber on our understanding of where we are on the timetable at the moment and what, if any, risks do exist. Because I think having a proper understanding of that, and this is not about giving you a hard time, this is about ensuring that we understand so that we can work with you wherever possible to make sure that none of these come to be a problem in the future. Mark Griffin explained clearly why he was putting forward his amendment, and I think he gave a very good account of it, and this was echoed by Alison Johnson's contribution. There is no doubt that the proposition of getting rid of the 20-metre rule is supported by the majority of consultees and organisations. However, as my colleague Jeremy Balfour indicated, whilst we in the Conservative group do absolutely have empathy with this view, we feel that the question of the 20-metre rule needs to be considered as part of the design of the overall system rather than in isolation, because we don't at the moment know what the regulations are going to look like. And I think it is always dangerous to preempt the design with sort of decisions in a debate like this when we don't know what the whole package is going to look like. So we're not saying we don't support what people are saying, we just feel it needs to be done as part of the design package. I did notice, though, that you raised, Mr Griffin, a really important and very interesting question on how UK case law will be dealt with in the design of Scotland's disability system. And I have no doubt that the Cabinet Secretary will be looking at this, and it'll be very high on the Scottish Government's agenda to ensure that the proposals they bring forward will not face legal challenge. Everyone in this chamber believes that there is scope to improve the way we assess disability entitlement. Whether it is through paper-based evidence or face-to-face assessments, particularly in relation to fluctuating conditions and mental health issues. And a number of members have highlighted this with stories about individual cases. Bob Doris spoke particularly about the reality that one size doesn't fit all, and I'm sure all of us can find examples of where that has gone wrong. The delivery of a personal-centred approach is the prize that everyone hopes to deliver within the new social security system. But that will come with significant challenges as the Scottish Government brings forward its regulations. How to balance trying to ensure that an individual's needs are clearly understood with minimal intrusive questions or complicated questionnaires isn't easy. And I think it is going to require quite a lot of thought about how you balance that freedom of decision-making for the person who's looking at it with ensuring that you have consistency in terms of assessment. There's been a couple of challenges actually from my colleague Jeremy Balfour about what will this actually mean for people. Will they be better off? Will they see more in terms of the way of their benefits? I suppose the answer to that at the moment is we don't know the answer, but we do know that there is a limited budget in terms of the transfer of monies from the UK government, and that will be a challenge that will be faced when looking at it. So looking at the wider issues in terms of how disabled people need support, it's not just about the benefits they get, it is about access to facilities, it is about engagement in society. And this was touched on by Alexander Stewart and Jamie Halcrow-Johnson, who called on us to remember that as we design disability benefits, they should be a gateway to independence rather than just a solution in themselves. And I'm actually going to end by actually returning to Bob Doris, because he said, the good intentions are not in doubt, but the devil, as always, is in the detail. And like others, I look forward to seeing the regulations and working with my colleagues on social security to scrutinise the proposals when they come forward. And hopefully we'll all be able to sign them off at the end with confidence that we are going to be delivering a positive system in Scotland.
Thank you. Now calling Shirley-Ann Somerville to close the Government Cabinet Secretary till 5 o'clock, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to begin by thanking all the members across the Chamber for their contributions to the debate, and I'm sure they would like to join me in thanking all the people and organisations that took the time to respond to the consultation or indeed to attend one of the engagement events. We received invaluable insights, and I'm sincerely grateful for all of those people sharing their experiences, some of them very personal and very difficult to speak about. But I've listened to those experiences and I will continue to listen, to respond and to engage with people to ensure that we transform disability assistance and make it work for everyone in Scotland. When we asked people what they thought of the current UK system, they said it was stressful, it was complicated and often inhumane. That message has been reflected in many of the responses to the consultation, and I'm sure that members will recognise such feedback from our own surgeries and our direct discussions with constituents, and that's not just right. I'm encouraged by the support for the majority of our consultation proposals and committed to giving some areas further consideration in light of the feedback that I've spoken about. That is why we have said that we will continue to inform our thinking with those responses in mind about our replacement for PIP in particular, and that includes the most criticised aspects of the system, including the mobility descriptors, the face-to-face assessments and supporting information. And we've also listened, of course, to the consultation responses and made changes to our proposals on redeterminations, short-term assistance, award durations and overpayments. Turning to some of the messages which have come through very strongly in the debate, there has been a challenge put forward quite rightly to the government about whether we have made enough change to the system. And I would strongly refute any accusation that there is no change. I would again point to the client journey that we have published today and the comparisons between the UK systems. That speaks very, very directly to that every step of a person's journey, it will look and feel and be very different. This isn't just about how we make decisions, it's how we interpret them, it's how we implement them, and all of that will be very different under the system. But we do have to bear in mind that there are sometimes implications if we change the system in certain ways. And that's why I will continue to have full and frank conversations with stakeholders about any implications that may arise from that. Jeremy Balfour was one of the members who raised this issue. I hope in his visit, I think he was in Victoria Quay earlier on this year to meet with some of the officials, and I hope he did get there the sense of work that's already going on around the disability assistance packages. The completion of the discovery phases is an important step. The development of the online application form, for example, is well underway. So there is a great deal of work already going on to design this system and to make sure that that's done, of course, in conjunction and co-design with those with lived experience. He also mentioned epilepsy in particular, and it's a very, very important point. Alec Cole-Hamilton raised the issue of fluctuating conditions as well, but I think in relation to MS in his speech. And that's something both that policy officials within government and the agency are working with stakeholders on. How do we ensure that, as opposed to what happens in the current system, that we do genuinely have a system that works for anyone with a fluctuating conditions or indeed mental health condition or learning disabilities. And that's important change that will be happening under the current, from the current system to the devolved system. Mark Griffin spoke about a number of issues which I'll try and pick up on a couple in detail. He mentioned specifically the issue of case law. We are developing an entirely new system up here for social security, and that's why we'll develop our regulations and our guidance. But we're closely considering case law and will engage with stakeholders very much on this specific issue. I can categorically say that we do not intend and will not be building a system that results in fewer rights for people. So it's how, in conjunction with members from the Labour Party, with stakeholders, with Social Security Committee, that we look at that in the round and we continue to look at what's wrong with the current system and indeed what works, because there are some things that we will want to pick up, including from case law, to ensure that we get that balance right. And I hold out the invite, I say, to him and to others to work very seriously on how we get that balance right. He spoke about, of course, the Labour amendment today about mobility. Now, there is no unanimity about what should happen about mobility, but I would absolutely welcome the tone of his speech, Alec Rowley's closing speech, and indeed other Labour members' speeches around this and other issues today, around working together to try and make the system better. We've already committed to considering what changes can be made to the moving around mobility rule. That's specifically why we asked in the consultation and drew that out as a descriptor in itself. So as highlighted in the Scottish Government's response, we will continue to consider how that activity and the associated descriptors can be amended to better assess mobility. It's clear from responses to the consultation and from our work that there are a number of issues, not just with the 20-metre rule, but there are significant problems caused by how assessments are undertaken and with how guidance is applied to that decision-making. It's a complex area, and it's not appropriate to scrap one element with mobility in isolation without first identifying a robust alternative that can be tested to ensure that there are no unintended consequences.
Mark Griffin.
I appreciate the Cabinet Secretary has said there isn't unanimity on what should be the replacement, which is entirely why the amendment leaves open. What there is on our proposal is near unanimity on supporting abolishment of the 20-metre rule, and just ask the Government again to consider that seriously.
Cabinet Secretary.
I've absolutely given my assurance that I will consider this seriously. It was in our consultation response that we will look at how that descriptor in particular needs to be looked at. I just don't think it's advantageous to scrap one part of what happens around mobility, not take into account anything else around mobility, and not have a plan in place about what we're going to replace it. So, as we do with all the aspects around this, we want to work with people to find the best solution and then take that forward with them. And as I say, I'm more than happy to work with members from across the chamber to see how that can be developed, but to do it in a holistic manner rather than what's proposed in the Labour amendment today. There's also, of course, a number of important aspects that have been raised by other members, Alison Johnson, around the crucial issue of reducing face-to-face assessments significantly. This is going to be a person-centred approach, so the design of the system is very much to eliminate any unnecessary face-to-face assessments. With that, I don't have time to go into detail about it today, but happy to have that discussion about what we're building into the system to ensure we're doing that at every level. Many members spoke about the effect that the current system has on people, Bob Doris, Jenny Gilruth, Alistair Allen and others, and it's very important that we always bear that in mind. Pauline McNeill talked about the time that the agency will have to make a decision around redetermination and a concern about the fact that's too long. That is because it's the agency's responsibility to collate the information for a redetermination, not that we're wanting to move slowly, but it's not necessarily all in our gift to be able to do that. But again, I'm happy to work with Pauline McNeill and others to see if we're getting that balance right. But it is that intention to ensure that we move as speedily as possible. And there will be a great deal of work going on to ensure that there are no overpayments being asked of people that would cause hardship, because I absolutely recognise, quite rightly, the point that Pauline McNeill made on that very, very important issue. Presiding Officer, as I said at the start, we will and will continue to need the cooperation of the UK Government to ensure that they do their bit to ensure that this process of devolution works smoothly. We do enter this process in a cooperative spirit, and we are putting the needs of clients first. We will share those clients with another government, and it is our priority to make sure that people get the right money at the right time. But that's why I want to take the necessary time to work with stakeholders to review mobility in particular and the other areas to ensure that we replace PIP with something that is fit for purpose. So I'm sorry to say that I will not support Labour's amendment tonight, because it just is too prescriptive in its nature and ignores the fact this is a complex issue that cannot be fixed just by considering one aspect in isolation. I will support Jeremy Balfour's amendment to the motion. I've set out a clear timetable for the delivery of disability assistance, and I remain absolutely committed to those timetables. As Aileen Campbell set out in June, we've pushed back the replacement of attendance allowance by a few months to accommodate the Scottish Child Payment. I think that's the right thing to do, to bring in a brand new benefit to tackle child poverty head-on, and we are absolutely on track to deliver that, and that includes the recruitment within the programme and the agency to ensure that those people are recruited on time when they are required. And I'm also happy to reiterate my existing commitment to protect clients when they transfer to Social Security Scotland. We will protect existing awards and award durations, ensuring that they are paid at the same rate. Presiding Officer, I'm sure members would agree that we're taking a sensible, measured approach to social security. We are delivering at pace, but always in a way that protects the payments that people rely on, whilst ensuring that we take the time to learn and to test everything we do. We need to ensure we get our systems and processes right, and that should be driven quite rightly by evidence. We will continue to engage with those with experience of the UK system and with stakeholders, just as we've done right throughout this process, to ensure that we get things right for the people of Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. And that concludes this afternoon's debate on disability assistance in Scotland. We're moving on to the next item of point of order. Jenny Mara.
Presiding Officer, I'd like to raise a point of order under Rule 13.5 of the Standing Orders on Written Questions. I submitted 2 questions on the 1st of October that were due to be answered by 4 o'clock today. Holding answers came in at 4 p.m. asking for more time, which is strange, as I submitted the questions a whole 4 weeks ago, and they pertain to a letter written to the Cabinet Secretary for Health in April of this year, which has never been acknowledged, let alone afforded a reply, and an official right to reply submitted to Healthcare Improvement Scotland, also in April, which has never seen the light of day. Both the letter and the right of reply are about the very serious matter of the breast cancer service in Tayside. In April, a review from Healthcare Improvement Scotland shocked this Parliament by reporting that dosages of chemotherapy were lower in Tayside than they are throughout the rest of Scotland. The oncologists responsible for this care strongly defend their care of their patients and the fact that there is no set regimen for docetaxel levels across Scotland. Their defence was contained in their right to reply to the HIS report and was submitted in April, but has never been published or seen the light of day. Healthcare Improvement Scotland is refusing to publish the doctor's side of the story. The letter to the Cabinet Secretary was from the head of mathematics at the University of St Andrews, who sets out the scientific case for the treatment regime that Tayside was conducting. He believes there is sound scientific evidence, and many people agree with him, and that the doctors have been hung out to dry. The Cabinet Secretary has not afforded this eminent professor either an acknowledgement or a reply. Presiding Officer, I'm confused by this delay. It is our job in this Parliament to shed light and get to the truth of all matters of public interest. The public in Tayside, families who have been affected, and those who will develop breast cancer in the coming months deserve a full account of what has gone on, so we can begin to restore confidence in our local breast cancer service. I am disappointed that the Cabinet Secretary has not used the opportunity of my questions to publish the right to reply, and I hope she will now instruct her officials to do so and to reply to Professor Chaplin, so we can start to shed a bright light on this very serious issue.
Can I thank Ms Mara, first of all, for letting me know, just ahead of coming across to the Chamber, of her intention to raise a point of order. I'm also disappointed that Ms Mara has only received a holding response after 4 weeks. However, a holding response does meet the requirements under our standing orders to offer a reply within the time frame required. However, I also note, I'm sure the Government will also be disappointed not to have given a substantive response, and I'm sure that they don't need my encouragement to offer one as soon as possible. And the point is noted. Now, moving on to business. The next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 19610 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau, setting out a revision to Wednesday and Thursday's business. Can I call on Graham Day to move this motion? Thank you very much, Mr Day. No member wishes to speak on the motion. The question, therefore, is that motion 19610 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Thank you very much. And we're going to turn now to decision time. First question is that Amendment 19577.1 in the name of Jeremy Balfour, which seeks to amend motion 19577 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville on improving disability assistance in Scotland, be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. The second question is that Amendment 19577.2 in the name of Mark Griffin, which seeks to amend the motion in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville, be agreed. Are we all agreed? No. We're not agreed. We'll move to a division. Members may cast their votes now. The result of the vote on amendment number 19577.2 in the name of Mark Griffin is yes 28, no 80. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. And the final question is that motion 19577 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville as amended. Yes, no, as amended, on improving disability assistance in Scotland be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. And that concludes decision time. Thank you very much. We're going to move on shortly to members' business in the name of Pauline McNeill on Asda Walmart contract imposition. We'll just take a few moments to allow members to change seats.